Eleftheria, good morning and welcome as an honor guest to the first episode of the series of podcasts on Infused with Vitamin L. I need to say that I'm truly honored to have you here. We've met many years ago in a completely different setting, and you have been instrumental in my journey. And there's a big part of you in Infused with Vitamin L. So it just felt for me very natural to kick off this series with you, with with a heart-to-heart conversation like we've always had. So if you'd like just to start by giving a quick introduction about yourself and the connection and why are you here? And then we'll dive into, I think, a series of quite exciting and crunchy questions. Welcome.
Thank, thank you, Zeina. It's like an absolute honor to be the first guest on this with the start of this amazing podcast with Infused by Vitamin L. So I'm really honored to be the first guest. And just a little introduction for me. I know that we're going to go a little bit deeper into it, but just to start, my name is Eleftheria, and that's from Hellenic descent. And that name means freedom or liberty. And in essence, this is what I stand for, is the liberation of the sacred feminine within us all. And so I'll start there and let the mystery unfold.
Unfold. Okay, so I'll start, beneath the biography. Obviously, I know about you and I've read preparing for this podcast because I really wanted to dive into some things really specific. So your professional path, Eleftheria, from being a psychologist to holistic therapy, women's circle, Jungian archetypes, that all unfolded into what we know today to be Terra Ziva. Uh, what was the moment or the accumulation of moments that made you realize that the conventional path could not hold where you were actually here to do or to transmit? Because obviously I like to say you're larger than life. There's so much to you. And I'd like to understand what was the catalytic moment
Mm.
that brought you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. How much time do we have? No. So yes. So I think to start, I was just born with a thirst for knowledge. And so I think that in itself, any one-dimensional container, I think would never have satisfied me in itself. And so I started my career path studying clinical psychology. And when I was doing my postgrad degree and finishing my mini thesis, we did our first case study with a schizophrenic patient. And I realized then that I was so grateful for the foundation of clinical psychology, of really understanding pathology. And I studied, developmental psychology. But I realized in that moment that this is not the path I really want to be on, because, I think different gifts and personalities really hold stuff. I have some, colleagues that I studied with that are amazing clinical psychologists, but that was not going to be me. And then I kind of asked life, okay, well, if I know that my purpose is to work with people and to support people, and this isn't the path, but what is the path? I have no idea. And it really, was a hero and heroine's journey in itself. And then, of course, life just provided me with this meeting of this really beautiful woman. And she said to me, well, have you read this book? And she gave me this book. And the book was You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. And I read this book, and for the first time, I looked at the metaphysical aspect also. So psychology, I'm a little scientist at heart as well. But for me, it was just kind of like one dimensional, and we're holistic beings. So it's body, mind, and spirit. And so that part was a little bit missing for me. And then when I found Louise Hay's work, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody else out in the world kind of thinks the way I do, and I'm not alone and a total weirdo. And then, as life would have it, the teacher training came to my town for the first and only time ever. And so that was another synchronistic moment. So I did the international accreditation for facilitating Louise Hay workshops, and that's kind of how my career started. And then I made the shift then from clinical psychology to counseling because I realized, that isn't the path that I wanted to go on, and included holistic perspective. And then I just followed my heart and intuition in terms of different modalities and tools. And that's really served me over the years because I don't believe that there's one cookie cutter formula for anybody. We're really unique, complex beings. And so what works for one person is not going to work for the next person. And so, I'm naturally curious. And so all different kind of therapies and modalities that I can study along the way just it gives me more tools in my toolbox just to really assist people because we're unique and individual. Yeah. And so
Yeah,
that's kind
and I mean,
of career path. Yeah.
speaking of experience with you, I mean, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other, but what works for one person at certain point in her life doesn't necessarily work 6 months down the line because we're in constant evolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
know I didn't know this about the Louise Hay, so
Yeah.
very excited to learn. It must have been quite a journey.
Yes, yes, it was quite a journey. And at the same time, also, which was interesting, and this is the reason my friend gave me that book, is at the same time, I started developing this huge cyst in my neck. And the doctors were quite worried about it being cancerous. And they did. And I knew on some level that this was really psychosomatic. Like I knew this was about stuff that wasn't being expressed. There was a lot of stuff from childhood I hadn't dealt with yet. And so they did the tests. Luckily, it came back benign, but I still needed to have an operation to have it cut out. And it was the size of a golf ball. And then I started reading and doing the Louise Hay emotional processing work and looking at the psychosomatic aspects of that. And then after that, I developed some more cysts and then started working with this, the metaphysical way. And that never moved into anything that needed medical intervention, but healed. And that kind of made me very curious about the capacity for our bodies to heal. And also that is also, I think often we also, especially in my kind of world and field, is that there's so much we still don't know. And there isn't like one specific way. And so when I support women on what these women would call the cancer adventure, every path is unique and individual. And so again, it's supporting people, meeting them where they're at and really offering all the different tools. Because again, what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. Yeah.
Wow, and considering, all of your journey, before we really dive into the list of questions, I'd really love to hear from you why infused with vitamin L. How does this resonate?
Mm, yes. So it really resonates with me from the perspective of like aligned values. And so I always say, when we talk about love, when you start talking about love, that's me. I'm in. Um, I feel very often quite frustrated at the world because I know that there's a different way. And I think since I've been really young, I've rebelled a little bit against systems that are quite closed and isn't open for innovation or evolvement. And if there isn't love in it, I don't resonate. I just, since very young, just know that there is a different way. We can be in relation to everything, relation to nature, relation to one another, relation to business, relation to all things. And so when when you shared with me infused with vitamin L, I thought, yes, this is exactly what we need. It's something that really helps us to connect. And I really believe at the end of the day, we really vote with where we place our attention, We vote with where we place our money. We vote with who we do business with. This is really how we can co-create a world, which I believe truly, if we stop for a moment and pause and ask our hearts and our souls and our spirits what we really want in the world. And this has been my experience over like 2 decades. I really believe everybody wants the same thing. And that comes down to we want to be loved and we want to love, because that is the thing that actually makes the world go round. We often think that, hate has got nothing to do with love, but hate actually is the lack of love. It's a deep need for love.
And you know what? I just, no later than this morning, I came across, I didn't know about him, maybe you know, Marcus Buckingham, who just released a book called Design Love In. And it's published by Harvard Business Review. And it's really a scientist looking into the systems. And he says exactly the same thing. After 30 years of studies, the only constant that always came back is love. When you don't have love for what you do, when you're not seen or heard, there's a quit. We quit. So love as the language, the universal language under the language, right? So as we said, vitamin L has centers on love, not as a sentiment, but really as a commitment to the humanity and the person in front of you. You have spent decades, woman circle, one-to-one, nature-based leadership. I mean, you work in so many different settings, even in the corporate world. And I'm often asked the question, what does actually love look like in a practice? Not declaring the value, but really as a daily discipline. And where do people most get it wrong? And why do we sometimes shy away or depreciate this word as in being
Mm,
romantic,
mm, mm.
or at least that it doesn't belong in the corporate world?
Yes, yes. So, this is normally the question that I start with, and this is also really fascinating for me, is I normally ask people from different cultures how many words in their language they have for love. English, only has maybe 1 or 2. Um, and so that's always my question because it's fascinating to me. But if we go back to ancient Greek, there is 8 different words for love. And these words really, because love is distinguishable, as you say, it's not the sentiment. And if we put people in a room, we ask them to define love, it would be very subjective, like a subjective definition of what that is. And all of our pains and our hurt around romantic love would be projected onto that definition.
Yes.
But if we look at the 8 words, the first is agape, which is universal love. Universal love. Then we have storge, which is love for your children, which is unique. You can't compare that love with anything else. Then there's philia, which is friendship. Again, this is a different type of love, which again, we can't compare with anything else. And that's based on trust and reciprocation. And then there is meraki, which is kind of like the concept where you love what you do so much that time and space just disappears. And so that's really enjoyment. Then we have eros, which now we're talking about romantic, kind of like sensual and sexual love. That's also completely unique and personal. And then we have, and of course now my ADHD mind is like getting a bit distracted, but and the word is lost to me. But it is philanthia. I think I might correct myself, but that is self-love. And it's the type of love which is appreciation for self, respect for self. We can't give what we don't have. Yeah. And then the last one is the shadow aspect. And so it's the shadow aspect, which is mania. And that is obsessive love. And this is also what I like about this inclusion of all different aspects of love, is that we also look at the shadow aspect, because love in itself without any boundaries also isn't healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think, even in terms of intelligence, we've also moved and evolved. So I often say and compare these two things that, in IQ, kind of the byproduct of that is competition.
Mm-hmm.
EQ, emotional intelligence, the byproduct of that is collaboration. And now EQ has evolved into LQ, which is quite new, only about 10 years old, but that is the love quotient. And for me, what emerges from LQ is really co-creation, collective intelligence. And I think this is the next step for us in our future.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And before diving really into a conversation about the future or the present, which will involve the youth, I just wanted to ask you something that really called my attention on the website is when you speak about the invisible emotional tax.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if I'm not mistaken, you were referring to HR professional who actually hold space, absorb the culture's pain. We speak a lot about discrepancy between values on the walls and reality in the hall, and how when we hold space but don't receive any replenishment, it depletes you. So, can you say more about that emotional tax, that invisible emotional tax that you mentioned, and what can we do?
Mm, absolutely. So I wrote an article about it on LinkedIn, and it's also on my website. And I think that specifically in the corporate world, what we see is HR professionals, also specifically because I work with them privately, hold the invisible emotional tax. And at the same time, this, I must say this, it also relates to women in families and the feminine work in the world, which is invisible. How do we value somebody taking care of the emotional needs of the group around them? We don't have a psychometric test for that. This isn't billable hours. This isn't, things that are in the normal, you know, in our KPIs and, all of these tests and measurements that we have. Yet without it, things fall apart. And I really think that this is just a natural, intuitive, instinctual gift that women bring to communities, teams, where they are. You'll see this in families when the matriarch passes over, the whole family falls apart. And so it's the same in our corporate structures, is that the HR manager deals with, different personalities, how to hold conflict, how to help people move past any mistrust, how to help build confidence. It's all these soft skills that are really not seen, and it's invisible and it's heavy on them. And so very often these are your empaths that you have in corporate. And there isn't any support structure or any acknowledgement of all of these gifts that are actually brought into the space, but the results are imminent. Without it, you can see that there aren't great results. And so what do we do about this? I think in many ways it is speaking about it, educating about it, bringing that awareness in. I often say that, when we're not aware, we almost have like an unconscious bias. So if you're not the one holding the invisible tax, you don't even see it. But if we start bringing awareness about that invisible tax to maybe the CEO or other people in the team or other people then you start seeing it. And the way that the best analogy for this is to think about, we're able-bodied people. We never think about, when I drive somewhere to go to a shop or to go for a meeting, am I thinking about, is there going to be parking for me? Will there be, access accessibility for me. Like, would I be able to go through the front door? Would I be able to see the person at the front desk? Am I going to be able to go through the lift? These are all things that we never think about, but somebody
Mhm.
who is not able has to think about all of those things. And so similarly, the minority in any kind of culture is thinking about a lot more things that take a lot more energy. And so when we become aware of it, the rest of us, how do we support that person? How do we check in with them? How do we offer them a skill set to go home and not carry all of that stuff because they've been carrying it alone because it's been invisible? This is in many ways what I also offer through the facilitation program, is to give HR managers that skill set. And the feedback that I'm getting from them is they're going home without such heaviness anymore. They now know how to set boundaries. They know how to empower people around them so that they're not carrying this invisibility anymore, this invisible tax.
Yeah, so that really brings in, the how do we bring in the feminine wisdom into these, very masculine structure? And again, we often speak about it feminine, not as in woman, but a man also has a feminine wisdom within him. And some women have embodied a lot of masculinity as well. So when you facilitate or when you lead this corporate retreat, how do you create the environment for something real to happen and to emerge? And what does it require of you personally? Because as you said, you're leading your HR, clients to 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 facilitate this way, but hearing
Mm.
it from you.
Yes, I think, when you're wanting to co-create like an embodied experience, because I think this is part of the shift that we're experiencing, is moving out of the hyper cerebral thinking about everything, but more into a lived embodied experience. Maya Angelou so beautifully said, people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you do, but they will never forget the way that you make them feel. And so the way in which I normally go in to facilitate a group in corporates or wherever I facilitate, firstly, it starts with an intention. And my intention always is to inspire, empower, and leave people with more of themselves before they entered the room. And so it starts with that intention. And then it starts with the first value of Infused with vitamin L. How do I meet you human to human, heart to heart? Because at the end of the day, it's about relationships, it's about humanity. And so, how do you create psychological safety where people can just let all the masks and identities drop and we can just be beautiful humans with one another? And when you can hold and facilitate that psychological safety, it is amazing what unfolds. It is amazing the depth of connection people can come to. It is amazing what beautiful creative innovation can come from that, because there is no innovation without vulnerability. They're not two separate things. We need vulnerability in order for innovation to emerge. And so people need to feel safe enough to ask the questions which they think are silly or stupid, or suggest something which they haven't thought through yet, or that share something that really has been holding them back. Maybe it's a conflict with somebody, but that's really been holding them back to really offer their natural gifts and talents. And so for me, those are the most important things in facilitating, is how to make that space. And then it's really also just meeting people where they're at. Like I have facilitated in corporate, I remember, uh, some accountants, right? And I was doing some mindfulness, and this made them so incredibly uncomfortable, where they just started giggling and laughing like, little boys. And I just welcomed that experience. not taking it personally, but just saying like, this is strange and weird to them. They're like, on this like team building exercise, now they're being asked to do deep breathing and just incorporate that into the entire experience by making them feel safe and that they're allowed to just be themselves. And if they are uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable. That's okay. And opening them the invitation to go like a little bit deeper. So it's heart to heart, human to human experience, and then having the skill set to create psychological safety.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can say, I mean, I'm part of your, I'm a proud participant and student of yours in the Root to Rise facilitating program, and we've spoke about it a lot. And there's an emergence. More and more people say that facilitation is actually the future of leadership, and your program is built around, facilitating structure. I mean, I've learned so much about healthy boundaries, things that, when you like you said about the HR invisible tax, when you bring this to mind, it feels so obvious and natural, but until you see it, it's not. So I wanted to ask you, for people who have never really experienced a circle, how do you distinguish this from a meeting, a workshop, and what actually happens there? Why does it make it a possibility that cannot be controlled by hierarchy or a top-down approach? I say you do. I say you listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So I'll start with reminding us all that neurobiologically we are wired for circle. And so our ancestors used to gather in circle. And so this is an ancient practice, which is really, really still embodied in us. And so I think neurobiologically, this is just my own hypothesis. When we gather in circle, I think there's some type of remembrance that we have already. And even just sitting in a circle, something already starts to shift in you. There's no hierarchy. There isn't somebody in the front of a podium, you're listening, but you're all equal. That then inspires collective wisdom to emerge. First, we create psychological safety. And after that, what happens in the circle is people start offering their own, what I'd like to call wisdom or their medicine to one another. And when that starts happening, it is one of the most beautiful experiences because a few things happen psychologically and also spiritually, but let's stick to psychologically right now. The first thing that happens is common humanity. Compassion in itself is built on a couple of principles, and the first one is common humanity. Very often we're so lonely and isolated that we think any challenge we experience, any thought that we have, any dissonant voice that we may have, we're alone. When nobody else thinks like this. And when we gather in circle, it's a safe space, and you can offer your insights or your questions really freely and openly, knowing that you're in a non-judgmental space and it's safe. When you offer that and you have feedback of somebody else that may have a different perspective, but they have the same thoughts, first of all, we start settling, our nervous system starts co-regulating because we're like, wow, I'm not alone in this. Actually, I'm not crazy. I'm actually, that this is a thought that's shared by many people, or a fear that's shared by many people, or a dream that is shared by many people. And so it's that common humanity that opens up a space of compassion. That in itself really connects us. Then the second thing is that we are really a species that is wired for social connection. Our society has become so fragmented and isolating that we've forgotten how to be in community. We move into conflict. We focus so much on the differences and we don't focus on all the similarities. We don't focus on the connection points. We just focus on the division. And I think there's been a deep breakdown in trust in society. And so when we come together in a circle, even if it's with people with different sets of values, and we can find the connecting points, we remember what it is to be human. So those are a few of the things that emerge out of the circle. Then I would say, this is also relevant. There's two different directions it can take. It depends on context. But I think in the corporate industry, there's huge space also for circles, meaning that if you start your days, your meetings with breath work, mindfulness, it doesn't have to be anything else, just helping people co-regulate their nervous system so that they're not coming from a space of a response to stress, because your answers, your engagement, how you perform, how you contribute is all based on the nervous system, that's connected to the nervous system. Let's put it that way. So when everybody comes together, everybody is relaxed and calm. There's a regulated nervous system. Now it's an open space. So I think that there can be a place for that. And in fact, I just saw a little video of somebody in the I think EU Parliament offering like breath work as a start. I mean, it's amazing. 20 years ago when I started, this work, people thought I was nuts. And now it's amazing to see that people are bringing these practices into the workspace. And why not? Why should the workspace not be a place where you love to go, where you feel like you're a part of meaningful, fulfilling work? Yeah.
I remember a while ago leading a meeting, and someone within the team, was mentioning how tired this person was, and somebody stepped in and said, "But what do you carry? It's just a job anyway." And it really startled me because, as you said, isn't job a continuation of who we are, basically, a full expression of who we are? And from my observation, for having been in the corporate world for 25, 30 years, is that literally we're tired of this separation between who we are in our personal life and how we should show up uh, in a professional setting, which is one of Infused with Vitamin L's principles, also practice over posture. Like, who are we really? I mean, like you said a few years ago, nobody would have brought Brene Brown's uh,
Yes.
power of
Yes.
vulnerability to the table and to the picture.
Yes.
So how can we say, how can we feel that somebody is care real here? How can we uh how can we literally, because it still remains, like some people say, okay, you're talking about Infused with Vitamin L, is care real here? How does leadership lead from a place of care and authenticity? It's not measurable metrics. But with your experience, with someone like you who's been around people in corporate setting, in individual setting, how can you, how
Mm.
can
Mm. Yes, I'll tell you my my personal test for is care real here. One, I want to know if it's a corporate environment, for example, I want to know whether and I ask the staff before I speak to the CEO, I want to know how they feel on a Sunday evening.
Mm,
And that will tell me everything about your
yeah,
company, your leadership, your company culture, everything. If you are anxious on a Sunday evening, and you can't sleep, and you're struggling to even get motivated to go to work on a Monday, that tells me everything about what's happening. If I go to a restaurant, I want to see how the waiters are treated. I want to see if they're happy. I want to see how they live, if they can afford the meals
yeah,
that they're serving, right? um if it's, so that's usually my measure. I want to see, here's another example, another test that I have. If I visit some places in Europe that have lots of cats, like street cats, I will look at how the cats are treated and what state they're in outside the restaurant or around the restaurant before I actually eat there. If the cats are doing well, I'm happy to eat there. If they're not doing well, I'm going to give your restaurant a skip. So it's really looking at, the environment, and then also really just trusting your intuition. Again, we have this incredible internal navigating system called our intuition. And it will tell you whether somebody is really performing care and it's not, it's part instinct and part, again, this is our biology. We know how to read people's body language, and language is 90% body language. So you'll know whether you're feeling hurt or not. The problem is with us is that we doubt our own intuition and our own instinct, and we tell ourselves, oh, you're being judgmental. Maybe the person's just having an off day. Maybe, we start justifying a lot of kind of behavior because intuition doesn't make sense, because on paper, everything looks great.
Yeah.
And so there's an internal fight that happens between the left brain and the right brain. And so it's really for us to marry those two things in so we can learn how to really just trust our intuition. That would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll come back to this. And speaking about doubting the intuition, I think that this whole also, there's been the movement, of opening your heart and being kind to people that really sometimes kill the intuition of, this doesn't feel right. So it really taught us to have such an open heart that the boundaries or your own intuition that is warning you of something, you double check or you doubt it, because you're supposed to be all encompassing, all loving. Uh, I mean, at least this is how I took to the extreme the
Yes.
journey. But speaking about intuition, you call yourself also as a third generation intuitive in a professional context. I think this is a very courageous word. And I love the courage that you have in there, because also speaking about infused with vitamin L in a corporate world also is a bit, I hope not disruptive, but at least it calls in it'll make you ask a question. So what would you say to leaders who are in very rigid structure, but who feels being called by the intuition, but who don't really have permission to name it,
Yes.
because intuition is not a metric, but it's much stronger than any of the metrics. So what's your offer? What's your what would you offer these leaders who are struggling with this voice?
Yes. I'm going to circle back to that question. First, I want to preface what a journey it was for me to openly say it and place it on my website, that I'm third generation intuitive. I had two third generation, my grandmother and my mother were very, I guess also for their time, very non-conventional women. And I learned really early on that they both really did business both entrepreneurs did business in a very different, unconventional way, really trusted their intuition and had some great results with that. And so in many ways it was, it was modeled for me, but still in a corporate setting or in the world at large, how do you actually say this, out loud? And so it was a journey for me to come out of the spiritual closet. And in fact, I did a program with a good friend of mine that's an organizational psychologist, and she invited me to one of her programs. And that was the intention, to sit in, with all of these corporate leaders and to say, well, I'm third generation intuitive. This is part of the principles that I bring. And this was years ago when nobody was talking about this. Again, luckily now you're hearing more and more about intuitive leadership and that it's something that's actually valued and supported. For leaders, and this is what I have experienced, leaders that make intuitive choices, the challenge is explaining it to their teams.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no measurement, nobody can make sense of it. And so the advice I would offer is one, speak openly about it, and two, ask people to look at the results, because that's the measurement, is the
Yeah.
results. And so the more you can start focusing people on the results and kind of explain, not without the measurements, but just explain that this is your process and invite them to trust you and be willing to be wrong. So again, it's that vulnerable heart-to-heart connection, including people. But I have met a few CEOs actually that use intuition as their guide in pivoting businesses, in changing things, and always with really great results. And so the invitation is, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, let's talk about it more, because when we do, we give other people permission to also use their intuition in decision making. And intuition, I also just want to say, intuition is a combination between lived experience and that spidey sense, which doesn't make any sense. So
No.
it's a bit of science and woo woo together. That's really what it is. So it's not
It is kind
completely off the charts.
No, and I mean, I remember reading about Richard Branson, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and the way he built the Virgin Empire. He talks about his guts, but the
Yeah.
intuition,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
fundamental it was in taking bold and decisions where people were like, this doesn't make any sense from a numbers perspective, from a competition's perspective, but he just knew he had to do it and
Yeah.
went with it. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Speaking about this, actually, there's one thing you and I also talk a lot about, because intuition is something we're born with it, right? The guts, and then slowly, slowly without it because of, but something that youth still carry it a lot. And you know how much I care about youth and building this intergenerational bridge between, those arriving in the corporate world and those who are already established in the corporate world. And we can see that youth today are carrying still a lot. Um, but yet they are the ones who want to change things and come back to a more connected approach. They're very aware. I mean, no later than yesterday, I was speaking to one of them who was telling me it's crazy how we procrastinate. I can see that even when I come back home, instead of doing something for me, I just scroll and scroll, and my dopamine is up. So how do we build a setup for these youth that are very aware, but that are still, uh, yeah, uh,
Mm, mm.
carrying a lot, I think.
Yes. Yes. I think I think that our youth need a lot of support. Um, but I would say that a different kind of support. And so I'll start with these two concepts. I think the world is experiencing, what we say like a polycrisis. We're looking at climate change, we're looking at geopolitical crisis, we're looking at crisis from lots of different levels. And this isn't something that we grew up as children. We never had to think about these things. We never saw the world news everywhere, so we're not psychologically even equipped to kind of deal with the weight of the world constantly. And I think that this is really something that the youth, is learning how to navigate, but we're seeing an all-time anxiety level in them. because of this, we're seeing loneliness, we're seeing like an increase in suicide, we're seeing real mental health struggle. And so that's where we're at. I think the other thing is that what we've lost in our society and civilization is the elder. Many years ago, we started getting super obsessed with what I call the Aphrodite shadow aspect, with the new 60s, the new 30, the new, and so in many ways, we lost elders in our communities, in our circles. And an elder, a true elder, is like a mentor. A proper mentor has the wisdom, the lived wisdom, because they've seen cycles of time. Think about the oldest tree in a forest, they've seen cycles of many different things. And so the elder, the mentor, or the wise person, when there's change happening, they don't panic because they understand their cycles of life. But when you're a youth and you're seeing the start of change, like you haven't had that lived experience to know that it's going to pass, it's going to turn over, there will be transformation, So that mentor or that elder also has an open space for the youth where you know the wisdom of the cycles of time, but you're also really empowering new thought, new perspective, new understanding. And I'll put this in a practical example. So often when I'm working with kind of executive managers that are generally, I think it context also matters, cultural, context also matters, but generally when I'm working with executive managers that are Gen X, right? Us, Gen X, Generation X, and they have Zoomers working for them, the level of frustration that they have with Zoomers and the projection at the Zoomers are they're lazy, they're entitled, they don't want to work, they don't, right? And when we start unpacking that in sessions, we can start looking at every generation that has got strengths and weaknesses. And when we can start looking at the strengths of each, again, we can making those connection points where we're collectively learning from one another. So often, this is the big catalytic moment for Gen Xers, is that what we see as Zoomers as lazy is the Zoomer generation wants to understand why.
Yeah.
Tell me why I'm doing it and I'll do it. Where our generation was like, I'm supposed to do this yeah, great. You want me to work extra hours? Yes, I'll work the extra hours. You want me to, it's unpaid, no problem. I'm moving up the corporate ladder. Zoomers are like, nah, life is more important than work. And so if I'm going to work the extra hours, are you going to pay me the extra hours?
Mm.
And I don't understand why I need to do this because there's a different process to do it. So if we as Gen Xers, for example, can look at that and go, wow, I wish I had that courage when I was that young. I wish I had the courage to say to my boss, no, I'm not going to work the extra time to make the shareholders rich. Like that doesn't work for me. If I'm going to work extra, then you're going to pay me extra or whatever the concept may be. And the reason we struggle to accept that and we see it as lazy is we may reflect on our life and think about how many hours of time we've given away. And so this circles right back to me in terms of care as well. Care for me also includes accountability. So to really face that. What the Gen Xers can, that's what the Zoomers can help us with. What we can help the Zoomers with is because they grew up in a world of technology where everything is instant gratification. There was no delayed, thing. Think about when we went on our first dates, there was like anxiousness, there was trepidation, there was suspense. You didn't know. Now you just swipe left or right. It's, the process of getting to the reward was much longer and it took lots of emotional processing to get there. Now that's been circumvented, which means there's a little bit of a lack of that skill set. Another way to say this is, a Zoomer will go in, maybe they're, or younger generation, they're ambitious, they want to be at the top and they expect to be there in 6 months. And so It's up to us to go. No, the steps are you climb the mountain, like there's a little bit of more hard work. Keep going. No, don't quit the job yet. No, there's some few more steps. So we can really support one another with the strengths of the different strengths of different generations. I think multi-generational teams and organizations can really build some amazing great things. The other thing I want to say about a true elder and a mentor is they know when succession needs to happen. They don't hold onto the power forever. So slowly, there is a letting go and passing down of the wisdom for succession, which we're not seeing in our society. And so we need to make space for the youth and empower them. And collectively, they've got the answers.
And we need them and they need us. So it's just a natural flow. And it's true, there's been a lot of divisiveness, which makes us feel disconnected, but somehow it's the same language in different wording or different approaches. They also want, like you said, recognition, they want success, they want contribution. They're not lazy, they want to work. But they've seen us. They've seen us
Yes.
exhaust. Burnout,
Exactly.
like I was saying last time, burnout has almost become a baseline. Nobody's surprised anymore at the rate of burnout. So they still have the energy to question this and to say,
Yes.
no, give me
Yeah.
something more than just running like a chicken without a head, not knowing where and what for.
Yes,
So, yeah,
absolutely. And that's the gift, is that clear boundaries from them to say, wow, we've seen this whole
yeah,
generation burn out. Like that obviously is not the path.
not working. Yeah.
That's not the path. And so, let's create a new one.
And a small anecdote, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but actually, infused with vitamin L really became this word thanks to the youth because they were the ones, when I would always joke, uh, it all started off cooking, I mean, you will relate as a Greek, Lebanese, cooking is something super important for us. So when I would say that I would put vitamin L ingredient in my cooking when it was good enough, then the youth picked it up and would tell me, "Oh, I've met this leader, or I went to this restaurant. They're very vitamin L. This place, you would love it. Look at how they treat their employees. They're very vitamin L." So they were the ones who sparked the whole the initial idea about this movement and this association of vitamin L. So. I would have loved keeping the conversation for hours and hours. You and I sometimes talk endlessly, but for the sake of our time, I just wanted to ask you, Eleftheria, if there's just one question, one message that you sometimes wish you could say and are not asked, something to really leave us with at the end of this conversation.
Mm. Mm. I would leave us with this. I think we focus a lot on all the poly crisis, but I think what's really happening in the world is that we are experiencing a spiritual crisis. And we can see it in the level of loneliness that is in our youth, but also in our adults. And I think if we can all, in our own way, be the space holders for one another and co-regulate nervous system for everybody in the world and start focusing on what we do want to create, because we have the answer together and we can only do it together. And so from that perspective, who can you take care of today? Who can you give a call to today that who's struggling? How do you invite a group of people together and say, hey, let's meet however many times often, but let's meet in a circle. Let's listen to one another. let's let's care. Let's start something new. Let us be in community the way that our hearts, our minds, our biology really tells us to. Because I think community, and my way for this is like facilitation and circles, and we heal in community. This is what I'm trying to say ultimately. Yes. And so that would be the invitation, I think.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful one because healing sometimes feel like a very lonely path, but healing in community is really all about the strength and the courage to trust, to show up, and to come as we are. No masks,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah.
pure messiness, pure heart-centeredness, and authenticity somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Facilitation is the future of leadership. This is truly,
Yes.
truly what I believe
Yeah.
is that. And just to close in a definition of that is, a facilitator isn't a coach, a facilitator isn't a teacher, but a facilitator really is a coherence holder, uh, the the space holder of the emergence of collective intelligence. That is the short definition of that. And I think that the more we move into that leadership style, the more I think we can move towards a world which is infused with vitamin L.
Vitamin L. Yes. And where creativity and innovation can flow, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful, Eleftheria. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This
And I
was
look
delightful.
forward to it was to me as well. And I look forward to so many more conversations around different topics and the evolution of what lies ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to our listeners. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for being here.